Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I'm happy to be here with you today. My name is Ron with TopStep. We will be talking today about OpenAir reporting, some tips and tricks, and some considerations to think about. So our agenda for today is really 4 parts. We're going to review some configuration. When we work with customers to implement OpenAir, we really, we focus is more on what are you trying to get out of the system than what are you trying to get into the system. And so really some of the considerations that you want to think about as you are building or configuring your system to make sure it can support your needs. Also, we always have recommendations for best practices for creating reports. There's some reporting challenges that you can run into that we'll talk about. And then obviously report maintenance from an admin perspective, your reports can get unwieldy. So we want to talk about some maintenance options. So let's talk about configurations. There's really what I call two key elements, right? There's the data itself, but then there's the ability to get the data out that you're trying to get, and really that's where filtering is a key component. And in OpenAir words, filtering is really important, and you need to understand, what is available, how to set the system up so that you can really get the right filtering out of the system. First off, I know everyone knows this, but filtering in OpenAir reporting is based on lists. You cannot do a filter on text. You cannot say, show me all the records where the field contains the letter A. It has to be a list, and there's lots of different options for lists in OpenAir. And so, you need to think through what is the right type of list for the data you're putting in, where should it live so that we can use it in our reports. There are few what we'll call power objects, main objects in OpenAir, where the related lists associated with those objects are more available than others. So when you're talking about kind of some of the key objects around users, clients, and projects, pretty much in any crosstab report, you can see all of the standard fields associated with those objects. And so, and use those in filtering. So you have to be careful. We'll talk a little bit about this in later as you determine, which objects, where do you want to put the fields you're trying to report on, and what objects are able to feed which types of reports. Custom fields obviously is a key component of getting OpenAir set up and running, being able to get those report values. There's lots of different types of custom fields with regards to lists. And it's important to know when to use what type of field. And so think about one of the key considerations when we're talking to customers about, okay, I need, for example, I want a list of sales reps that I want to be able to select on a project basis, okay? So that sounds simple enough, right? There's a lot of different ways we could do that. Well, the question is, and I always ask is, okay, how subject is that to change? And, how do we think about the maintenance of that list? Because sales reps can tend to be a moving target. You can have new sales reps come and go. And so, if you do it as a drop-down, for example, now you've got some challenges maintaining the drop-down values, making sure that you're adding new drop-downs, and it's difficult to sunset a drop-down value. So there's some risks there of data issues. So maybe in that scenario, a pick list makes more sense. And so then you decide, okay, well, where do we want the data to live on a pick list? What's the best place? Do we just do it in a pick list of users? So that would be an option as long as those sales reps are also users in OpenAir. And then potentially you could use form permissions to limit the list to only those sales reps. So then you have to just maintain the form permissions as users come and go. So that's just some of the considerations to think about when you are putting those together. If the fields are if the value of the dropdown you're looking to do is fairly static, then a dropdown field or radio group are perfectly fine. For example, billing types. If you do fixed fee T&M, for example, then those are generally good drop-down options, and because those are generally not going to change. You could simply add to them, but you're generally not going to want to remove them. A radio group is something you probably don't see very often used. We don't recommend it to customers. The challenge with a radio group is, they cannot be cleared. So you can't, in a drop down, you can unselect any value, clear the value. In a radio group, you cannot. And there's some reporting limitations around radio groups. So we tend to steer customers away from radio groups as an option. The other benefit of drop-down fields is you can limit the drop-down a couple of different ways. There's a feature that allows you to relate to drop-down values and have one be dependent on the value of another. So, for example, if I have a billing type that says, billing type T&M, and then I have another related drop-down, I can say only show these values if T&M is selected. And so it will give you a subset of the drop-down values. You can also use form permissions the same way. So you could do form permissions to say, if this drop-down equals this, then the drop-down values of this field are allowed these. And so that's another way to be able to do drop-down. So the drop-downs and the pick lists are generally the two that we work with when we're configuring OpenAir. And multi-select is another option, but the challenge with multi-select is in reporting. You get basically a text field, and you're not able to filter by multi-select fields. One thing to note about dropdowns, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to delete a dropdown value, it's certainly easy enough to go into the dropdown custom field and remove a value. But you're going to create what I'll call ghost values in the system in the UI. It's going to look like it's still there. It's not going to remove it from all that places where it was. But if you report on it, it's going to show as blank. So it creates some weird behavior in the system. So you would want to bulk update those old ones, old values to whatever the current value should be through a data update in order not to create those ghost values. Custom field, as we're creating custom fields and you want to be able to have those used as filters, you need to just think about, the types of records, as we mentioned, that you're putting the custom field on, and make sure that it's going to be available where you expect it to be in the reports. A good example we run into is billing rules, right? You can create custom fields on billing rules, as you can on just about every object in OpenAir. But billing rule custom fields are not generally available in all reports. So generally, you're only going to get those in a tabular report, but you're not going to get those in a crosstab. And it's a little strange because billing rules are a key component of OpenAir, but there is some limitations into the billing rule object. It's not what I would consider, quote unquote, a power object. Generally, the power objects where you can pretty much get the data, get those filters, is the users, the clients, projects, services, invoices, cost centers, and customer POs. So you can see in our drop-down ops here, we can see all the service fields, the user fields, project fields. They're all available in a company-wide cross-tab report to be able to use as filters, as long as your reporting on the data includes the data that you're reporting using the filter for. So just something to think about, as you're building those types of custom fields, is making sure you're putting them in a place where they can be universally used if that's the intent. Dates. Dates are available everywhere, and dates can be really confusing to new customers. So we really work with folks to make sure that we think about the dates in the system that we want to use. For an example, a time entry date has 8, 9 different date options on it. So depending on what you're trying to report, could depend on what date you use in your reporting. So it's important to consider dates as you're building. So what date do you use? Well, it depends on what you're trying to, what message you're trying to get out of the report. What story are you trying to get out of the report? And there's a few dates, right? There's the date of the report is going to run within a certain period of time. But as it's doing that, it also would want to look at the dates on the objects it's going to use to display in the report. And so, here you can say, when I run a report and I'm looking at timesheet values, what date am I using when I run a report on timesheet values in this particular report? So this is, again, something to think about as you're building these reports. It's really depending on what story you're trying to tell and what data you're trying to get out. It's like, for example, if you're trying to report on timesheet compliance, generally you'll want to use the start or the end date, potentially the date submitted or the date approved. Those are what we call key dates for compliance. If you're using financial reporting, then it's either the date of the transaction, or if you're using accounting dates, you may want to use the accounting date of the transaction. Those would be the key elements. If you're doing utilization reporting, generally it's the date of the time entry or the period in which the time was entered. If it's project management, it's going to be either dates. And in audits, you want to look at create dates as well as core dates. So again, a lot of date options. Think about the different ramifications of choosing one over the other. There's also date time dependencies. So, I want to run a daily revenue report, which is dependent on timesheets being approved for new revenue to be created. Well, unless you're doing daily timesheets, those are two conflicting requirements, because revenue can't be generated till the timesheet's approved. Timesheet's weekly, so you're not going to get a daily revenue report. It's going to look the same, every day until the 7th day where the timesheet gets approved. So you need to think about those. You can always use charge projections, and you need to think about that as well, as what dating, what do we set the charge projections up, what are the date parameters we need to think through there, and what data are we looking at. Using worked and booked or assigned, but then within the you can create custom calcs using the charge projections. There's also date filters inside of reports that can help you date charge projections. So even though your charge projection, let's say it says this year forward, so it's picking up past and future, in the reporting, you could hard code, this month forward for projections. So the report will pull only the projections going forward, even though the charge projection table is populating based on this year in my example. So again, more date considerations as you're building and configuring the system. So let's talk about report development. Why do I need this report? What am I trying to achieve here? Design out your report. Think about the audience. What decision are you trying to make from the report? Who's the audience of the report? What do they care about? What level of detail do you want to include in the report? Say I want timesheet hours by month. Well, do we need to go down to a task? Do we need to go down to a user, or is it just a project? Well, it's going to depend on the user and who you're building the report for and what they're interested in. So it could include all of those, might be just project level, could be just user level. So you need to think about that to see what level of detail. How do you want to subtotal the report? Or do you want to create the report so it has minimal subtotals? Some of this could be consideration if you're going to use, there's a pivot table option in OpenAir that allows you to pivot table a lot of these reports, which allows you to really do some fun stuff with those. And so, the more layers you have in a report, the more challenges a pivot table can create. So are you going to want to pivot table this report will kind of dictate how do you set the report up and minimize the subtotaling. How much additional information other than the main records you're reporting on? For example, if we're including subtotal by project, do we include the project manager? Do we include the budget? Do we include the start date, the project stage? All of those are additional details you can add to your report, but are those needed in the analysis or the decision making that's going into that report? So again, things to think about as part of that building process. Currency considerations. This can be a tricky one, right? Because, each time, each new currency you have turned on creates a new value in the system. So if I want to look at, projects across different countries, what currency am I choosing? There is a way to set up a native currency in OpenAir. If you're interested in talking about that, please contact us, so that you get a single column where it is the native currency, and you just include the currency as a detail field. So an example, if it's $100 US for one project, but it's 120 euros for another project, we can show 100 and 120 in the same column, but include the euros and US in the detail field. So something to think about as you're determining how to report across your currency. Time periods. So, obviously OpenAir comes out of the box with pretty standard calendar time periods, weekly, monthly. But, a lot of companies don't use those when they come to their accounting periods, and instead they may have custom. They may run a 4-4-5, where your month 1 is 4 weeks, month 2 is 4 weeks, the next month is 5 weeks. How do you report on those that align with your periods? And so you might need to go into custom time ranges to create some custom periods that you can then add to your report, so you can align with any fiscal calendars, fiscal months. And are we looking for, inception to date from the beginning of record data through the future? Are we just looking forward? Are we just looking backwards? Again, these are all kind of date fields, considerations in your report to think about as you, evaluating the design of your report. And who's going to see this report, and do we have any data restrictions we need to build into the report? So there's some tips and tricks on that. We actually cover that in a future slide. If there is some data restriction, there could be, if someone's not available to see cost data, do you want to include cost data in the report? Because if you share that report, maybe someone tries to run it and they get the dreaded error is you don't have permission to run this report. So think about who's going to be the audience of the report, and if there's any data restriction that you need to keep in mind. Are you able to get all the data in your report without a custom calc, or do we need to build some custom calculations? Something to think about. Sometimes custom calcs and pivot tables don't work well together. If you've ever had a custom calc and downloaded that report in pivot table, sometimes there's some weird number, 16-digit number you see that doesn't show up in the UI. So you have to think about the structuring of your report around custom calcs. We actually talk about that in a second. So configuration tips. So I want to see time by customer with customer, project, and task details, right? So you could go in and create a report that's subtotals by client, subtotals by project, subtotals by task, and then you get the output of the report similar to what you see here. And this is great, works great in the UI. But when you download this, it may not work great in Excel the way you want to see it. There may be some challenges. Maybe you want to flatten this report. So you want the same data, but you don't want to have this layer. So you could do an alternative where you do a task as the only summary, but you add project and client as a detail. And so now in this scenario, the output of the report, you're basically have a flatter report. So here you can see it's going to give you the task, the project, and the customer as detailed columns in the report. Now I have a flatter report. This is a little more Excel friendly, especially if you're doing pivot tables with the data. So something to think about is what makes more sense in how I subtotal or I get the same detail with or without subtotals. One thing to note, when you're, in this scenario, we said task, we're subtotaling in this scenario by task, then user. So the task will show the task detail, then the user will show the detail of the user. If you add in this example, we have department as a detail of the user. And so the order changes. If you decide to go user first, then task, you're going to get the report in the UI is going to look different. If you download this, you're going to get all the same details. The columns will just be moved around, but just something to think about as you structure your subtotals. Are you looking at task, then user or task in this example? What are you trying to achieve? So data view control. So this is probably something that most people don't take advantage of as much as they could, but we help customers kind of build these report filter sets. So obviously a user has a filter set. I can, I set on my record, I have all access, and I can go in and see all the data, which is great. But let's say I want a report where I run it and I only see data like a utilization report. I want to see my utilization. I don't want to see everybody's. So you could create like a global utilization report that shows everybody, and then you can create a filter set that says self-view only, where it's set to I only see my stuff. So even though I'm all access, when I run this report, I only see my data, which is nice. And again, it's at the report. So anybody that runs this report, it's going to only see their own data. You can do the same for project reports. You might have global visibility into projects, but when I run this report, I just want to see a list of my reports. And so this is another filter set opportunity to embed within the report. So rather than trying to come up with a filter set in different modules, you can do a filter set within the report to universally control access to data. And the benefit filter sets, there's also some meta filters you can do, but the benefit of a filter set is you have more flexibility. Like you could add one that says me and my employees, so you could run a report and get not just yourself. So there's some flexibility there in the filter set usage. Here's some challenges that we see with customers. Why can't I report on bill rate? That's a pretty common one. This is where custom calcs really can help, because unfortunately, even though the bill rate's there on the billing roll, it is not a value you can just pluck out of the system, put it in a report and run. You have to back into the billing rate. So you can do a custom calc where you could say, show me my projected data divided by my projected hours, or my actual data divided by my actual hours, and back into a bill rate at a project level or at a user level, or both. So this is one of those odd things. It sounds like it should be available. Unfortunately, it's not. And this is where custom calcs become a real benefit to pulling that into data. And then once you create a bill rate custom calc, you can actually use that in other custom fields. So if I create bill rate, now I can display that in my reports. I can also apply custom calcs to that bill rate if I need to. So it becomes a usable value in reporting. Be careful with mixing types of report values in a custom calc equation. It can provide unexpected resources. I remember the day I learned this. It was a long time ago, and we had just learned how to use constants in custom calcs. And time entry constant, if you notice, is something that comes out of the system. And so let's say, for example, I wanted to do a custom calc for booked hours and filter it by only booking type equal confirmed. If I do a booked hours calc times a constant based on a time entry, it seems to work as long as there's time against the project. If I run this against a project with no time, I get no value. And that's because you're mixing the calculations. You're mixing bookings and time entries in the calc. So you have to make sure to have the right type of constant as you're applying it to different values in order to get the expected output. Be careful with report level filters. You may conflict with your custom calc filters. So, I try to push customers towards custom calc filters. That way you're not having to embed additional filters in reports. But you might have where your custom calc is filtered by booking type equal confirmed, and maybe you create a report where you want to use booking type is not equal to confirmed. You're going to have conflict there. and may not know it. So just be careful, where are you filtering? Are you filtering at the calculation level, or are you filtering in the report level, depending on what you're trying to achieve? Bill rate is another good example of that. You could have task type conflicts between how you calculate bill rate. Object relationship. So sometimes you think, oh, it's in the database, we should be able to report on this, that, and the other. Unfortunately, even though the database tables are all there and they all have relationships, just because A is related to B and B is related to C, A and C are not directly related. So you may not be able to pull the values from A and C together into a report. Although A and C will have commonality within B. So this is where you basically will try to decide where is my common element between the tables I'm trying to pull, and then maybe that is the basis for the report which you're trying to pull together. Billing rules is a good example, right? Billing rules don't have a direct relationship to charges, but you would be surprised if that's the case, but it's not. So if you run a charge report, you can't pull billing rule data into that report. However, the billing rules have a relationship with billing transactions. Billing transactions have a relationship with invoices. So that's the commonality table between those types of objects. And when we're doing customization of OpenAir for charges based on billing rules, we have to go from the charge to the billing transaction to determine what billing rule we need to go update, and then from the billing transaction we jump to the billing rule. So that's not a direct line to get there. So again, that's a scripting mechanism we do to kind of fill some of the gaps where we have customers that have some of those missing data or the lack of relationship and not being able to get the data they need. OData. So several years ago, OpenAir came up with a business intelligence offering. It is an additional fee in OpenAir. And what it basically allows you to do is publish your reports into an OData, using an OData standard, and then that can be brought into Excel. It can be brought into business intelligence systems. And the benefit here is you've got OpenAir reports that let's say, for example, I have an OpenAir charge report. I want to publish that, and then I want to publish an OpenAir billing rule report together. Well, there may be commonality. They have projects common together, clients obviously, but you want to be able to combine those two tables into a single report. Well, in OpenAir, you have a challenge doing so, but if you pull those two separate reports using the business connector, publish those through OData, you bring those into your BI tool, then all the data is in the BI tool, and you can commingle those data elements together to create pretty reports and tables and charts and all that fun stuff. So this is another solution. We've used this for a lot of customers. We recommend it for all customers, especially if you're trying to get OpenAir data out of OpenAir in an efficient, quick, easy way so that you can use it in a BI tool or some other manner. There's a lot of application for this business intelligence connector that we've found. So in publishing, it's not just reports. You can publish list views as well. So if I have a list view I want to publish, which is more like a detail report or a tabular report, you can publish those as well. So there's, again, a lot of options there. One of the other options, if you want to be able to commingle, is you could do an API integration and pull data into a data warehouse. We have a lot of customers that want to do data lakes or data warehouses, and we generally try to see if we can get them along using the BI tools, but some of them want to pull the entire tables out of OpenAir. So you can do an API call into OpenAir and pull the tables that you want to be able to bring back into the data warehouse, and then you have to, recreate the database, recreate the data outputs from all the data you're pulling in. So that is something customers have done when they're looking to build that corporate-wide data There's also a service called ABS, Automatic Backup Service. This allows you basically schedule a nightly drop of your full database. And this also fits in if you're looking to build a full data warehouse outside of OpenAir and you want to be able to have a nightly new pull of data. So the ABS will allow you to schedule and pull in all the entire database. It's also good. It will give you a backup of your current OpenAir should you ever need it. So we've had, you can get the data in a few different ways. It's a pretty inexpensive option. It is a paid for option though. You have to add it to your licensing, but it's pretty inexpensive and it works pretty well if it fits your needs. Okay, let's talk about maintenance. So everyone starts off with the best intentions. We're going to create a core set of reports and we're going to roll them out to the business. And then 2 years later, where's that report? How do I find it? What reports or what report is giving me this data? It can quickly become a bit of a where's Waldo scenario. And so there's some things you can think about in, cleaning up, maintaining those reports. So come with a couple of things, naming conventions. OpenAir is now coming out of the box with a lot of reports, and they're using a naming convention by prefixing basically the type of report, a finance report or a project report in the name. But as you're creating custom reports from scratch or by editing some of these reports, having a common naming convention could save you a lot of headaches to being able to pull the report information. Also, if people are taking those standard reports and they're saving them as their own, we also recommend maybe putting people's initials so that as I'm running a list of all reports, I can see which reports are owned by standard reports versus which reports have been modified. We also don't see folders used a lot, and it can be really good to create a folder structure and be able to store those reports there. And you can embed folders within folders, so you can have a set of project management reports and be able to break those further down in this example by region. And then what's nice about this is you can share the folder with a group or with individuals, and then they automatically inherit as new reports are put in those folders. So it's an alternative to sharing a report by sharing a folder. So folders can be a really powerful way to also organize your reports. One thing we recommend is having a dedicated user to own all corporate-wide blessed reports. So in this example, we've got a reporting admin as a user. It does burn a user license, but we feel like it's worth it because it does give you can tell which reports are basically the standard reports, the go-to reports, the blessed reports versus others. And so you can't proxy in as an admin, so you would create a reporting role that gives you all the reporting capabilities in that role. And then people that are allowed to create these corporate-wide reports can proxy in as that reporting admin role, create the report, and make it available to people. So it is another option for keeping reports clean and not making a mess. One thing to note, there's a status. This is the old UI, so I apologize. But there's a status option that came out a couple of years ago that allows you to basically do some cool things with the report. So bulk change in owner, right? Someone leaves and I want to go in and bulk move their reports to someone else. You can do that in the status report. You can delete reports as well. You can delete schedules. So let's say, the report is scheduled weekly and I decide I don't want to schedule it weekly, I want to schedule it monthly. You can actually just go in and remove the schedule from and then put it on a new schedule if you don't want to go in and update. So that's cool. One thing to note, I didn't know this actually, I learned this recently, is if a user has a scheduled report and that user leaves the company and their user account gets inactivated, that scheduled report, the next time it runs, it'll determine that user is no longer active and it will not run anymore. So it would OpenAir will automatically remove the schedule from the report tied to that inactive user. So that'd be another reason if that you do need that scheduled report, you want to move that report to an active user for that schedule to continue to work. Notes field. So if there is a notes text area field on within the reports, and this is a great opportunity to maybe put a description of what the report does, or even a few keywords in that notes field, tags that you could use maybe as well, because those notes field become, word searchable in advanced filters. And so you could say notes contain service and bring up all the different reports where the service is tagged in the report. So the notes can be a really nice reminder of what this report does. It also helps your end users, validate they're running the right report as part of that. So notes can be a really nice add-on to your maintenance of your reports. Oh, the dreaded project dashboard that goes from 5 reports to 50. As you know, these project dashboards can be really powerful, and they're really nice to be able to just jump on the dashboard, run a report, have it filtered. But all of a sudden, you start to see very specific reports that shouldn't be there, because it's really meant for very broad reports that you want to run on a project-by-project basis within the dashboard. How does John get his October hours report on this project dashboard? Well, what's happening is there is a checkbox that John's not looking for when he took a report that was published and he modified it to his own. This make report available didn't get unchecked by John, so he inherited his new report, now inherited this setting, and now his report that he only cares about himself is now showing up on all the project dashboards. You run the report, it won't show anything because he's not working on that project, but it's kind of just jumbling up, the list of reports. So there's an option to fix this. You want to think about role permissions. You want to be able to first off, you can do cleanup in the status, going in and bulk cleaning up looking to see which projects have specified report usage and solve that. But you also can limit permissions to administrators only. So you could take away the project manager role, specify report usage. So if John, in this example, accidentally does create his own copy of a report that is published, because he doesn't have this permission, the report will never get on a dashboard. So you might want to think about looking at who has permissions to specify those reports and make sure the people that shouldn't don't have that. Deleting reports. We look in some customers that got reports there that haven't been run in 2 years. We recommend just blowing them out if no one cares enough to have run it in the last year or two. Probably a good idea just to get rid of them. So that is something we commonly recommend and see. We always tell customers at least at month end or at year end, not month end, but year end, take a look at the reports, see what kind of cleanup you want to do, part of the year end process in OpenAir. Deleting reports from inactive users, that's also a common action. If the user is not there anymore, you just blow out their reports. I would make sure you look at the reports, make sure someone's not running them or using them. You can transfer the ownership of the report if need be in that scenario. But in general, if it hasn't been run, and especially if it's tied to an inactive user, then more than likely you're not going to do any harm by just blowing it out. Again, you can do this in the status tab within the report module. So you can sort by last run or sort by inactive users, and be able to then take bulk action here, selecting, using the checkboxes, selecting those reports, and then bulk deleting them. You can also do bulk changing the owner as well using this actions. There's also a maintenance. This is probably the only maintenance setting. I don't know if most of you are aware this exists, but there's a maintenance setting that you can run to say just delete saved reports from inactive users. I actually prefer using the status because it gives you more power to review before you delete. But this is another option under the maintenance to go ahead and click that box, run, and click OK, and it'll automatically clear out those reports. All right, in summary, when designing reports, understand how you're tagging the data, what's the structure of the report, making sure you understand your audience and what their intended use of that report is, how much detail do they need, or do they need a lot of detail. Make sure you have report governance, make sure that you controlling who can create reports, how do we organize our reports. You don't want people creating reports that don't know what they're doing. Now, all of a sudden, they're sharing and passing along reports that are not accurate or not built correctly, and now you've got people making decisions potentially on bad data. So we want to enhance cleanliness which provides clean reports, data cleanliness, and get those things done. You get it. So thanks again for joining today. I appreciate it. Reports is a meaty topic. We probably just scratched the surface on what we could cover. But again, I appreciate everyone's attention today. We'll go ahead and stop the recording.